Welcome back to the lecture on 1923 to 1929. What we're going to look at now is what happened in the Munich putsch and what the consequences of the Munich putsch were. So there are plenty of great resources out there online about the Munich putsch, lots of videos that show dramatisations of it and so on. So if you want any more detail about what exactly happened on the 2 days that it was occurring, just do a quick Google and you'll find loads. I'm just going to cover the very basics so we understand what it was, so we can move on and look at the consequences, which is much more likely to come up in an exam question. So, the Munich putsch is also known as the beer hall putsch, and the reason for that was because it started in a beer hall in Munich, which is the capital of Bavaria, which is a region in Germany. So much like how in the UK today we have places like Wales or Scotland, which are regions that have their own government within one country, Bavaria had its own government and its own rulers. So it had a man called Karr, who was a state governor, Lossow, who was in charge of the police, and Seisser, who were in charge of the army. So Hitler marched into this beer hall with 600 of his SA and shouted out something on the lines of, the revolution has begun, the hall is surrounded. And all the people who were sitting there drinking their beer turned around and thought, what's going on? But they were a bit intimidated, so they let Hitler get up and talk. And he took Karr, Lossow and Seisser into a side room. No one's 100% sure what happened in the side room, but the upshot of it was that Hitler was able to come out and say that everybody was in agreement and that they were going to march on Berlin the next day and take over the country. He also got Ludendorff to speak, and a lot of the people who really kind of recognised him as a famous figure and as an important general thought, oh good, look at that, Ludendorff's on side. However, Hitler made a key mistake. And the key mistake was that he let Karr, Lossow and Seisser go whilst he went away, had a nap before he got up the next day to do the putsch. And somebody called the police, informed the police, and the police were ready for Hitler and his supporters the next morning. And when Hitler started his march, very quickly they were put down by the police. They were shot at. 16 Nazis were killed, 4 police were killed in return fire. Hitler escaped in a yellow car. So that's what happened. So in the short term, it seems like the Munich putsch was a failure. And this is very, very important. You should be able to explain how and why it failed as one side of any given argument about the consequence of the Munich putsch. The most likely question to come up about the Munich putsch is going to ask you whether it was or was not a failure. It could also come up and ask you about whether how it was a failure or how it changed his mind. So you need to know both sides of the argument, and the fact that it, in the short term, obviously failed is a nice argument, and you can explain how Hitler had tried to overthrow the government and was put down and shot at, and his compadres were shot and killed. So Hitler was unable to take power. All the key conspirators were arrested and put on trial, and 16 Nazis were killed, which makes it seemingly a disastrous and humiliating failure. And he was put on trial and put into jail. So again, it seems like a complete disaster. However, in being put on trial, it gave Hitler a chance to argue against the Weimar government and for Nazism. So this was quite a big thing that he was up there every day in this court case, getting lots of publicity. And so once he had been released from prison later on, he was much more famous, and people were much more likely to understand his views and potentially support them. Furthermore, the court itself was very sympathetic to Hitler. The maximum sentence for people who tried to overthrow the government was execution. And just think what happened to the left-wing leaders like Rosa Luxemburg, who tried to overthrow the government. They were executed. Okay, but Hitler got away with it. He only got 9 months in prison, and it was a very relaxed prison sentence. He was able to speak to people, have visitors, and so on. But furthermore, and quite importantly, it actually gave him time to solidify his ideas and change his ideas and write them all down in Mein Kampf, which is his new book, which becomes very popular and widely read. He used his time in there also to really clearly rethink his tactics. A quote attributed to Hitler is that he said, "We will hold our noses and enter the Reichstag. Sooner or later, we shall have a majority, and after that, Germany." So what he meant by this was that he didn't like the Reichstag, hence why he had to hold his nose. He didn't like democracy. He wanted a dictatorship. But he decided that the only way he was going to successfully take over Germany, clearly the putsch hadn't succeeded, so next time he had to do it through either sort of democratic or at least political means. And ultimately we find out later on that that is how he takes power. So if you have this question as a 16 marker or evaluative question, that should really be your conclusion. That whilst it seemed like a failure in the short term, in the long term it was the only thing that really encouraged Hitler, that he had to do what needed to be done, which was to try and become more democratic, become more political, and become more successful as a leader. And that's what we're going to look at next when we look at how Hitler changes his party to become a more successful electoral machine.